Republicans and Democrats teamed up. Both parties. It wasn't just the Republicans. It wasn't just the Democrats. Both of them, of these parties. If you're tribal about your politics, if you have this tribal notion, well, I'm Democrat and everything Democrats do, I'm Republican and everything, you're nuts. Okay, you're nuts. Both Republicans and Democrats teamed up recently to repeal vital protections of the Dodd-Frank Act. And last week, President Trump, as you would expect, signed this disastrous law into effect. So here this is almost, again, it's one of those stories where you look at it, you almost have to laugh. The banks were saying that the new law allows us to have control of $250 billion before we have to perform under anything that the Dodd-Frank has to say. Now, it was that if a provider had $50 billion, $50 billion versus $250 billion. If they had $50 billion, all the Dodd-Frank laws would apply. So the Democrats and the Republicans said, oh man, we got to look out for our banker pals. And they passed this rollback.
Right, because the banks were able to convince them that, hey, I know you think a small bank is anybody with less than $50 billion, but really $250 billion is a small bank. And the protections that now are not in place for banks with less than $250 billion in capital, they were stress tests to make sure that this bank and everyone who was holding their money in it or had their mortgage with them could survive a financial crash. And now they don't have to go through that testing. So if you have your money in one of these banks that are $250 billion or less, or you have your mortgage or your car loan, if that bank tanks, they have no idea whether or not they're going to remain solvent, whether or not they're going to be able to, do whatever you need them to do, whether or not your money is still in that account, because they were able to convince almost every Republican and 50 Democrats total, 33 in the House, 17 in the Senate, that, you know what, God. I only have $249 billion. I'm really tiny. I don't have much money.
Yeah,
I shouldn't have to test to make sure I can survive the next disaster that we're probably already working on.
No, there's no question that we're working on the next disaster because the fundamentals are just lining up exactly like they were 2008. Walk back in time, 2008. The banks didn't suffer at all. None of them went to prison, even though they were engaged in just out and out lying. I mean, to investors, to mom and pop investors. They were lying to them. They were saying this is a good stock. The bank that was saying this is a good stock was selling their stock. You see, and so at the same time, they're loading mom and pop pension programs, not just in the United States, all over the world with this garbage. Okay, so they come out of it. I remember, we're going to do something about this. Remember that election? We're going to do something about these bankers. And Obama was up there, and I was going, wow, I really love hearing a presidential candidate talk like that. Well, none of them went to jail. Taxpayers ended up footing the bill for everything. Taxpayers that had nothing to do with this Wall Street thuggery scam had nothing to do with it. Taxpayers ended up footing the bill because the Democrats and the Republicans said, these are our pals. We're getting a lot of money from Goldman Sachs and all these other folks. Yeah, we know they committed crimes, but they let them go anyway.
Yeah, and at the same time, not just let them go, they let them go with billions of dollars in bailout money in their pockets as they're heading back to their banks.
And they kept all their bonuses. Did you follow that part too?
They did.
Yeah.
And Goldman Sachs last week came out and said, with the way things are heading right now, with what we see happening in this country, we're predicting that a recession is right around the corner. Are they going to stop doing what they do? Are they going to stop engaging in this kind of activity or lobbying for looser bank regulations? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
They're not going to do anything to try to help us from this recession that's coming because they got to make as much money and get out as soon as possible.
Isn't that the same Goldman Sachs where one of the top of the food chain at Goldman Sachs says, we really better not cure cancer,
right?
Because if we cure cancer, we're going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah.
If we cure these long-term diseases, we're going to lose a lot of money. Goldman Sachs, that is the new norm of CEO thinking in America right now.
It really is.
The Federal Election Commission decided to do absolutely nothing about the growing threat of foreign money in American political campaigns. Okay, now let's set this up a little bit. We know because there's so many sites that tell us where the money comes from. You use them all the time when you're writing your stories. I've got a couple that I really rely on. But here we've got Saudi Arabia pumping billions of dollars into our process. I mean, they do it all kinds of ways. They do it by campaign contributions. They do it by PAC contributions. It's dark money. And then in exchange, we end up selling them all the missiles they need. It's
looking the other way on all the horrible human rights abuses.
Oh yeah, I mean, Saudi Arabia, of all dictatorships, it is one of the worst in the world. So we got all this money coming in, and so a couple of folks on the board say, Federal Election Commission say, maybe we ought to interfere with that a little bit. And of course, what happens?
They voted party lines in this case. And here's what the rule was that they actually voted down. It was whether or not super PACs had to state if they had taken foreign money. It wasn't even necessarily outlawing foreign money or saying how much. It was, did you take foreign money, yes or no, which is illegal. It is illegal still in this country to take foreign money from any kind of foreign country, whatever it is, and use it for election purposes.
Well, it used to be. I mean, it's on the books, it is illegal. But in actual operation, the money that comes in from the Mideast, from Saudi Arabia, from these folks that really, they know what they're buying. They're buying Republicans and Democrats.